Thank you for joining Pioneer. I'm Chris with Norman Public Library Central, and this is the 7th video in our series on the Swift computer programming language. In the last video, we learned how to add an else-if statement to our conditionals. That allowed us to compare to more than just one item. I left you with a challenge. Your challenge was to make a list of foods, have the computer choose a food, and then use a complex conditional statement to print out different things depending on what was selected. Here's my solution. I created a variable called foods, and I put some of my favorite foods in it, and then I let the computer choose lunch. You'll notice here that I used the let statement to create a constant because I don't plan on changing lunch, so it's not really a variable at all. We'll talk more about let constants later on. Then I check to see if lunch is equal to pizza, and if it's pizza, I print out one thing, and if it's chocolate, I print out something else, and if it's anything else, I print out another statement. Let's see what happens if I run my code one time. And I get rutabaga is an okay lunch too, but not as good as pizza. But remember, there's a random statement in there, so if I run my code again, now I get pizza. And if I run it again, I get chocolate. And if I run it again, I get pizza again. The computer has very good taste. So you get the idea. Every time I run this, it chooses a random element from foods. This is probably the first useful program you've actually written, in that you could use this to choose what you wanted to eat for lunch or what restaurant you wanted to go to, or you could use it to roll a dice in a role-playing game. You could use it for many other things. So the random element from an array is a very powerful tool. The thing I want to cover today, however, is getting your code organized. Up to this point, we've only been writing a few lines of code or maybe a dozen lines of code. But as our code becomes more complicated, we're going to want better ways of keeping things together. That better way of keeping things together is called the function. We'll begin by creating a simple function that just prints out hello. In Swift, a function begins with the func keyword, F-U-N-C, not to be confused with funk like F-U-N-K, because computer programmers are lazy and function just has too many letters in it. So, F-U-N-C, and then a space, and then the name of our function. I'll call my function print hello. And in its simplest form, a function has an open parenthesis and a close parenthesis with nothing in between them. We'll add things in between those parentheses in later examples. Then I'll put an open curly brace, just like we saw for our if statements and our for loops. The curly braces group your code together. When I press enter, Swift will automatically give me the close curly brace on line 5, and it will indent line 4. Please leave the indentation. It makes it much easier to read your code. We'll add a single line of code here. And congratulations, you've written your first function. To use this function, later on in your code, you type its name, followed by its parentheses. Later on again, we'll add things to those parentheses, but our print hello function doesn't have anything between the parentheses. So if I run my code now, it prints out hello one time. And the nice thing about functions is you can use them over and over again. So wherever in my code I need to print out hello, I can use that function. Of course, this isn't really a very useful function, so let's write something that we might actually be able to use later on. Let's write a function that does our coin toss. Just like print hello, we'll put an open and close parenthesis because it doesn't need any information from the rest of the code. But coin toss is going to give us back a piece of information. That piece of information is a string. When a function is going to give you back a piece of information, you put an arrow, that is a dash and then a greater than sign, and then the kind of information it's going to give you back. In this case, a string. That tells me that every time I call coin toss, it's going to give me a string. It will give me heads or tails. I put my open curly brace and then press enter. And now we'll write the same code that we've written before. I'll make a variable called coin And it's an array that contains two elements, heads and tails. Now we'll make a variable called toss that is our coin toss. Remember, I'll put an exclamation mark at the end here to tell Swift that I know that sometimes coin might be allowed to be empty, but in our code it will never be empty, so random element will always give us an element. Finally, I'm going to return my toss. The return statement tells Swift to give me back the information that was in toss. I'm now going to go back and make two changes to this code because Swift is giving me advice. It says variable coin was never mutated. Consider changing to let constant. And it says the same thing about toss. It's telling me that my code never changes coin or toss. And so instead of making them a variable, I can make them a constant. You'll see this all the time in Swift code. We use let when we don't intend to change things later on. That helps Swift know that we don't plan on changing it, and so if we accidentally try, it will yell at us. Now we have a function called coin toss. We use coin toss a little bit differently. We don't just type coin toss because coin toss is giving us information. So we are going to make a variable to store the result of our coin toss, and I say result equals coin toss. And of course, I can print result. So the difference between coin toss and print hello is that coin toss gives information back to whoever calls it. In this case, the information is a string that we then store in result. Well, it turns out that this business of tossing a coin and printing out is probably pretty useful. So let's write yet another kind of function. Let's write a function that takes a number of times to toss our coin and prints out all of the results of that. So this function will be do some tosses, and this time we are going to put something in the parentheses. We're going to put number to do. So I'll give do some tosses a number of coin tosses that I'd like it to do. And I have to tell it that that is an integer. Remember, an integer is a number that doesn't have a decimal place. So we're going to do some tosses, and the number of tosses we're going to do is 1 or 10 or 1,000. But it's never going to be 14.6 because you can't toss a coin 14.6 times. I will open my parentheses now. This is not going to return any information to us. Now we need to loop number to do times. Here's what that looks like in Swift. I'll say for underscore in 0 dot dot less than number to do, which is pretty complicated looking code, but we'll talk a lot more about ranges and for loops in Swift later on. So for now, just enter it the way you see it on the screen. And I'll put an open curly brace and press enter. And once again, Swift will give me my indentation and my close curly brace. Now I can call print directly, and inside print we'll call coin toss. Remember, don't forget the parentheses after coin toss. To tell Swift that you want to execute this piece of code that we called coin toss, you need the parentheses. So we'll print out coin toss some number of times. And now we have a pretty useful little function because I can say do some tosses and then number to do, and let's tell it to do 10 coin tosses. And if I run my code now, it prints out 10 times my coin tosses. And of course, you could make this number much larger. Number to do 199,990,000 times. And if I run this code, it will do it for a long, long time. Your challenge for the end of this lesson is to modify this code so that instead of flipping a coin, it chooses a food and tells you what to eat not just for today, but for lunch for the rest of the week. Good luck, and I'll see you next time.